prepare for an inflation crisis in Australia. Welcome back to our channel. Today, we will be discussing the possible inflation crisis that is taking place in Australia. In the previous video, we talked about the possible inflation crisis in Canada and discussed the factors that are causing this. If you haven't seen that video, click on the box that will appear on the upper right-hand side of your screen to watch that before continuing with this one. Inflation in Australia is developing at its quickest pace in 20 years, and this has caught Australia's central bank by surprise. This resulted in the central bank aggressively raising inflation predictions, hinting how high interest rates could further increase to get the country's cost of living problem under control. The quarterly monetary policy statement of the Reserve Bank of Australia, RBA, has warned that core inflation might now reach 4.6% by December, up to 2 percentage points from its prior projection in February. That would be significantly beyond the RBA target band of 2 to 3%, and inflation was only expected to return to the top of the band by mid-2024, implying a long tightening cycle. Last quarter, Australian consumer prices rose at their quickest annual rate in 2 decades. The cost of gasoline, home construction, and food increased, stoking speculation that interest rates might be raised from record lows as soon as next week. RBA Governor Philip Lowe said in a statement that the board is committed to doing what is necessary to ensure inflation in Australia returns to target over time. But this would require the RBA to further increase interest rates for the upcoming weeks. This would be unpleasant news for Prime Minister Scott Morrison, who is fighting a tight election where voters are concerned about growing living costs. Prime Minister Morrison addressed the inflation crisis in a media conference, stating that while Australian families are pressured, inflation in other countries is far worse. Impact on the country. But before we continue, go ahead and click the subscribe and like buttons. It takes a lot to make these videos. Your small actions tell YouTube to keep promoting our videos. Thanks. Now back to the video. Today's world is even more complicated. Interest rates were already at historic lows in most nations before the pandemic. When the pandemic broke out, countries borrowed trillions of dollars to save their economies. As a result, asset prices skyrocketed, widening the divide between the haves and the have-nots. However, rising asset values were only the beginning. We now have significant shortages, which force up costs, thanks to the pandemic and the constant push to convert the globe to renewables regardless of cost. The relationship between rising gas costs and a scarcity of nitrogen-based fertilizer is a typical example. The EU faces a fertilizer crisis that might quickly turn into a food catastrophe. Food costs are growing due to increased petroleum prices and urea scarcity. There is no denying that inflation is out of control. Laborers in Australia are unable to construct buildings due to a lack of supplies. Restaurant operators are paying exorbitant salaries to get personnel. Getting a car takes months, and food costs are skyrocketing. Furthermore, gasoline costs have reached new highs. The Reserve Bank of Australia is caught between a rock and a hard place. Raising interest rates aims to slow the economy down, yet inflation is caused by a shortage of supply rather than excessive demand. There have been few, if any, examples of inflation being effectively stabilized without a recession. Increasing interest rates and raising the ordinary worker's mortgage repayments will do little to alleviate the current inflation. Nonetheless, rising rates appear to be what central banks are doing, so it will happen in Australia at some point.